Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into the world of Isaac Newton today, going beyond the apple falling on his head. There's so much more to this guy, and I have to say, even I'm a little surprised by some of the stuff we're about to unpack.
Absolutely. I mean, people often think of Newton as just this, scientific genius, right? But he was also a man of intense faith. He was really into alchemy, even predicted the end of the world.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. This is the guy who basically gave us the laws of physics as we know them.
Right. And yet he was also dabbling in stuff we might consider, well, a little out there. It makes you realize that even these brilliant minds, they're products of their time, grappling with the ideas and sometimes the limitations of their era.
So where do we even begin with a guy like this? I guess we have to start at the beginning. And even Newton's birth has a bit of a twist to it.
Totally. He was born just days after Galileo died, the scientist he really admired. And even though there's that Julian calendar discrepancy, Newton felt this profound connection, almost like he was chosen to carry on Galileo's work.
Wow, that's a powerful feeling. But man, his childhood was rough. Abandoned by his mom at 3, held onto that resentment toward his family for years, and you even sent over a journal entry where he listed his sins. Threatening to burn down his parents' house is on that list. A little chilling.
It's a good reminder that genius doesn't equal emotional stability, right? You have to think those early traumas had to shape him, maybe even contributed to him being so private and later on kind of paranoid.
You can definitely see those glimmers of brilliance early on, though. Designing sundials as a kid, building those windmills, shows you he was observing, tinkering, figuring stuff out.
He was also super competitive. He had this drive to be better than everyone else, and that drove him to achieve amazing things. But it also led to some nasty feuds, which we'll talk about later.
So Newton gets to Cambridge, right?
Mm.
Starts out studying the classics like Aristotle and all that. Then he bumps into these revolutionary thinkers, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, boom.
It must have been like his mind just exploded. All these new ideas, new ways of thinking about the world. And Newton, he wasn't content just accepting them. He had to push further, understand deeper.
And that's where his genius really takes off. Realizes the math of his time. It just wasn't enough to solve the problems he was working on. So what does he do? He invents calculus.
Calculus, the foundation of so much of modern science and engineering, just comes up with it because he needs a new tool.
Seriously, mind-blowing. Makes you wonder what the world would be like today if Newton hadn't been so relentless, so driven to find answers.
It's impossible to say, really. And that was just the start for him. Those years, 1664 to 1667, they're called Newton's miracle years for a reason. He accomplished more in that short time than some scientists do in a lifetime.
Okay, so spill the beans. What made these years so miraculous? What kind of discoveries are we talking about?
This is when he turns our understanding of the world upside down. Light and color. He challenges the existing theories, even does these risky experiments on himself, staring at the sun for long periods, even poking a needle under his own eyelid.
Whoa, hold on a second. Staring at the sun, a needle in the eye, that's dedication, I guess, but also kind of crazy now. Where's the line between scientific curiosity and just being reckless?
It definitely makes you think about how far he was willing to go to prove his ideas. But these experiments led him to discover that white light is actually made up of all the colors of the rainbow, a pretty basic idea that we totally take for granted now.
Right. And then there's the invention that's named after him, the Newtonian reflecting telescope.
Oh yeah, before Newton, telescopes used lenses, which had issues. But his design, revolutionary. He uses mirrors, which meant astronomers could suddenly see much farther, much clearer. Imagine that. It literally opened up the universe for exploration.
So we've got Newton in his 20s. He's revolutionizing how we see light, inventing calculus, and about to drop his theory of gravity on the world.
Oh, and speaking of gravity, I'm sure you've heard the story about the apple falling from the tree, right? The one that supposedly gave Newton the idea for gravity.
Definitely. I learned about that in school. But is there any truth to it? Or is it just a good story?
Honestly, the apple story is probably made up. But you know what? It does kind of cap into the essence of Newton's genius. Being able to see those big connections in everyday events, he realized the same force that pulls an apple to the ground is also holding the moon in orbit around Earth.
That's wild. To grasp something so fundamental, so universal, it's incredible. He gave us the laws of gravity that we still use today to launch satellites, explore space, and he's doing all this in his 20s.
Truly remarkable. But here's the thing. Alongside these groundbreaking discoveries, Newton was battling some deep inner stuff. He was obsessed with religion, delving into alchemy, even predicted the end of the world.
Whoa, that's a cliffhanger. I definitely want to hear more about that. Sounds like we're about to uncover a much more complex, maybe even darker side to this scientific icon. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's explore the fascinating and sometimes unsettling world of Newton's secret pursuits.
So we left off with Newton making these huge scientific discoveries, but he was also struggling with some pretty intense personal beliefs. You mentioned he predicted the apocalypse. I got to hear more about that.
Well, it all starts with his faith. He was a devout Christian, no doubt, but he had some, let's say, unconventional beliefs. He straight up rejected the Holy Trinity, a core idea for most Christians.
He rejected the Trinity. That's a pretty big deal, right? What led him to that?
He believed the Trinity was basically a corruption of true Christianity, introduced by, get this, the devil himself. Newton spent years and years studying the Bible, trying to find hidden messages and expose this, like, grand conspiracy.
So he's using that same incredible mind, the one that cracked the code of gravity, to decipher the Bible.
Exactly. He was comparing different translations, searching for inconsistencies, hidden meanings, just like he did with scientific data. He even predicted the world would end in 2060, based on calculations from the Book of Revelation.
2060, that's oddly specific.
Mhm.
Makes you wonder what he thought he saw in those texts, the patterns he was connecting. You mentioned earlier that he saw the universe as this giant clockwork mechanism.
Yeah, that was a core belief for him. Everything ran like clockwork, governed by these precise laws, not just physics, but theology too. He figured everything, even biblical prophecy, could be understood if you just analyze it carefully enough.
Okay, so we've got the brilliant scientist, the religious rebel, and then there's alchemy. I gotta admit, when I saw that in the research he sent over, I was confused. Isn't alchemy like, well, magical thinking?
Think of alchemy as the messy ancestor of modern chemistry. Part experiment, part philosophy, and a whole lot of mysticism. It was all about turning lead into gold and finding the elixir of life. Lots of people saw it as, yeah, pseudoscience, but Newton, he was hooked.
But why? I mean, this is the guy who figured out the laws of motion, gravity. It seems so out of character. Was he really trying to make gold out of lead?
Yeah.
Or find a magic potion?
It might seem that way now, but remember, back then, alchemy wasn't seen as totally separate from real science. They both emphasized experimentation and observation, even if alchemist theories were flawed, to put it mildly.
So for Newton, it was more than just a scientific thing. There's a spiritual side to it too, right?
Definitely. He thought alchemy held the key to, like, the divine secrets of creation. He was obsessed with the Philosopher's Stone, this legendary substance that could transmute lead into gold and grant immortality.
Immortality. So even Newton, with all his discoveries, was still looking for eternal life. Didn't those alchemical experiments take a toll on him, though?
Yeah, they came with a price. A lot of those experiments involved dangerous stuff. Mercury, lead, you name it. He was exposed to those toxins for years, and it probably contributed to his health problems later in life.
That's kind of a sad thought, isn't it? This brilliant mind unlocking the secrets of the universe, but also poisoning himself in this quest for, I don't even know, transmutation, divine knowledge.
It's a complicated picture, for sure. Newton suffered from mood swings, paranoia, even had a full-on mental breakdown in the 1690s, accused his friends of plotting against him, withdrew from society, became a recluse.
Wow. Makes you think, even genius doesn't make you immune to the darker side of the human mind. Were those alchemical pursuits a way for him to deal with his demons? Or did they actually make them worse?
Hard to say. But even with all that turmoil going on inside, he was still making incredible breakthroughs. He published his masterpiece, Principia Mathematica, in 1687. That's where he lays out his laws of motion and universal gravitation.
Principia Mathematica, the book that revolutionized physics, right? Set the stage for pretty much everything that came after. And he did that while dealing with all this inner turmoil.
A testament to his sheer brain power and determination. But even as he reached the peak of his career, Newton was plagued by these rivalries and feuds. He clashed with Robert Hooke over who deserved credit for discoveries in optics and gravity, and his fight with Gottfried Leibniz over who invented calculus, legendary for its bitterness.
So even fame and recognition weren't enough. He still felt threatened by others.
Seems like he was very protective of his ideas and his reputation. He even used his power to try to suppress the work of his rivals, like destroying a portrait of Hooke and launching a campaign to discredit Leibniz.
Wow, that's pretty ruthless. But even with those flaws, his contributions to science are undeniable. He changed how we understand the universe and opened the door for so many scientific and technological advances.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating is that this scientific giant, this guy who revolutionized physics and math, he also spent hours and hours deciphering biblical prophecies, searching for the philosopher's stone, and wrestling with these huge spiritual questions.
It's like he was living multiple lives at once.
Hmm.
The scientist, the mystic, the ambitious, and sometimes, yeah, vindictive human being. A pretty complex legacy. I'm really curious about what happened next in his life. Did he ever reconcile all these different sides of himself? So we've got this picture of Newton. Brilliant scientist, yeah, but also this like spiritual seeker, alchemist. Did those parts of him ever find some kind of peace?
Well, he comes out of that breakdown in the 1690s. A changed man in some ways, but he seems to have a renewed focus, Turns his attention toward politics, public service even.
Newton in politics. That's not an image that comes to mind easily. I can't imagine him giving rousing speeches or anything.
He did serve in Parliament for a bit, but yeah, by all accounts, he was a pretty quiet politician. The story goes he only spoke up once during his whole time there, and it was to ask for a window to be closed.
Sounds about right, given everything we know about him. But you mentioned something about public service.
Right. So in 1696, he is appointed Warden of the Mint, eventually becomes Master of the Mint. This was a big deal overseeing the production of all English currency, stopping counterfeiters.
From the mysteries of the universe to coins. That's quite a leap. How'd he do?
This is where Newton's meticulousness really shines, his scientific mind, too. He puts all these reforms in place, makes the coinage more accurate, higher quality, way harder for those counterfeiters to operate.
So he's bringing that same rigor, that analytical approach, to money matters.
It makes me wonder if he saw any connections, between the laws governing the cosmos and, like, the principles of economics.
Interesting thought. He even got personally involved in hunting down counterfeiters, busted some criminal rings. Some people say he really enjoyed that part of the job, like maybe it was a way to bring order to a world that often felt chaotic.
But even Newton, the genius who cracked the code of gravity, he wasn't above making mistakes. You sent over some information about the South Sea bubble. That was like one of the first big financial crashes, right?
Yep, the South Sea Company promised investors huge profits from trade, drove the stock price through the roof. Newton, at first, he invests smart, makes a good chunk of money. But then
He got caught up in the hype, didn't he? Human nature, I guess. Even a brilliant mind can get swept away when everyone's making money, afraid of missing out.
exactly. Worried he's missing out on even bigger gains, Newton jumps back in, invests a ton right at the peak. And of course, the bubble bursts. He loses a fortune. Ouch. It's a reminder that even the smartest people can get things wrong, especially when emotions get involved.
There's this famous quote, supposedly after he lost all that money. Newton says, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Pretty humbling, coming from a guy who devoted his life to understanding the universe.
So even with that financial hit, Newton keeps going, keeps working at the Mint, stays a big name in the scientific world, right up until his death in 1727, leaves behind a legacy that's, well, amazing and complicated at the same time.
Totally. His discoveries are a cornerstone of science, no doubt. But to really understand him, you got to look beyond just the science, see his passions, his obsessions, his flaws. That gives you a much fuller picture.
So after exploring all this, the alchemy, the religious beliefs, does it change how we see his scientific achievements?
That's something everyone has to decide for themselves. Some people might see those things as, distractions, proof that even a great mind can have some strange ideas. But I think you can hold both views at the same time. Recognize how much his discoveries changed science while also appreciating the whole journey, the intellectual and spiritual side of things.
He wasn't just some scientific machine churning out formulas. He was a real person wrestling with big questions. What's the universe all about? What's the meaning of life? What's my place in all of this? What do you think drove him?
Yeah.
Was it just a thirst for knowledge? Or maybe something more? A desire for control? Fear of the unknown?
Maybe it was all those things. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from Newton's life. Genius isn't just about being smart. It's about that sense of wonder, the willingness to explore, to push the boundaries, and the courage to face those big mysteries that are at the heart of, well, being human.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, that's for sure. You've given us a real glimpse into Newton's world, and it's been a pleasure exploring it with you. I hope this inspires everyone to keep digging, keep learning. Who knows what other insights and inspiration you might uncover. Thanks for listening.